I've mentioned the motorcycle story a few times in these videos, and in this video, I'm just going to read it for you. This comes from David Halberstam's book called The Children, which is about the young 20-year-old, roughly, kids who in 1960 did the sit-in movement, and it focuses on Nashville. There are a lot of chapters in the book. Chapters 1 through 26 basically tell the story of these children, these young people, and their involvement in the Nashville sit-ins. Part 2 in the book goes up to about chapter 55, and it talks about their involvement in the campaigns that took place in the next few years, the Freedom Rides, the Selma campaign, the Birmingham campaign, and so on. It goes up to about the March on Washington. So I'm going to read from chapter 13 in David Halberstam's The Children. On Big Saturday, Bernard Lafayette had finally decided that he was worthy of being a warrior in this army. For weeks, he had been bothered by private doubts over whether he was truly nonviolent. He had found Jim Lawson a remarkable teacher, but privately, he wondered whether he could live up to Lawson's teachings. Was Lawson's advice simply too spiritually demanding for him? At the time, he was trying to find his way as a man, as a minister, and as a political person. True followers of Gandhi were able to rise above the taunts of their adversaries. Would he be able to turn away in the face of taunts of his enemy, all those white rednecks yelling nigger? So far, it had been hard. Lafayette was all too aware of his own frailties. He knew there was nothing noble about himself, that he was a person with all too many human weaknesses, above all, an instinct to lash back at his attackers. The Bible had asked him to turn the other cheek, and here was Jim Lawson telling him exactly how and when and where he was supposed to do it. Could he sacrifice his own safety, his own manhood, for the ideals which he believed in? What was most difficult about this particular question was that only he would know the inner truth. He knew that he could, if he so chose, fake it, hide his inner hatred and rage, and pretend that he felt love toward these people who were trying to hurt him and his closest friends. But merely hiding his rage would not be good enough. For him to be, in the truest sense, part of this, he would have to feel love. He found almost to his shame that one of the things which bothered him was how he felt about their young white assailants. He did not mind taking their blows, but he did not want them to walk away and think that he had turned the other cheek because he was a sissy. But on that Saturday, he faced the challenge and decided he was worthy. He was completely unprepared for the moment when he was tested, and he had no time to remember his own internal debate. He was in a group of students walking from the First Baptist Church to the lunch counters, and he was near the end of the line, about 3 or 4 people from the end. Suddenly, a group of white toughs charged the black line and attacked one of his colleagues from American Baptist, a young man named Solomon Gort. It happened very quickly, with a speed and intensity all its own, and yet at the same time, it seemed to take forever. Years later, he could remember almost all the details. The whites had knocked Solomon Gort down, and they were kicking him, and Bernard moved as quickly as he could to get back and protect Solomon, to put his body down on Gort's, as they had all been taught. That would make them switch their attention from Solomon to him, and they did, beating and kicking him instead. Just then, Jim Lawson walked over. He did not rush over as if to an accident or as if to stop a beating. Instead, he walked over very calmly, as if to a long-standing appointment. It was as if he knew all along that Solomon Gort was going to be knocked down and mauled, and that Bernard Lafayette was going to try to protect him. Lawson's arrival shifted the attention of the whites from the fallen Gort and Lafayette to Lawson. The thing about Jim, Bernard remembered, was that he was so utterly self-assured, so confident, as if he were accustomed to dealing with white toughs, beating up fallen black demonstrators every day of his life. Jim seemed nonchalant, just another day at the office. The leader of the whites was sporting what was the prevailing uniform of the day for white toughs: black pants, black motorcycle jacket, duck's ass haircut. When he saw Lawson, he was enraged by Lawson's coolness, and he spat at him. Lawson looked at him and asked him for a handkerchief. The man, stunned, reached in his pocket and handed Lawson a handkerchief, and Lawson wiped the spit off himself as calmly as he could. Then he looked at the man's jacket and started talking to him. Did he have a motorcycle or a hot rod car? A motorcycle, was the answer. Jim asked a technical question or two, and the young man started explaining what he had done to customize his bike. Amazingly, Bernard thought, these two men were now talking about the levels of horsepower in motorcycles. A few seconds earlier, they had seemed to be sworn enemies, one ready to maul the other. By this time, both Solomon Gort and Bernard Lafayette were back up on their feet. The line was moving again, and Jim and the young man were still talking about the man's motorcycle. In that brief, frightening moment, Jim had managed to find a subject which they both shared and had used it in a way that made each of them more human in the eyes of the other. As they walked away, Jim waved to the man, and the man remained still, neither accepting the friendship nor, for that matter, rejecting it. It had been a marvelous example of Christian love for Bernard. The lesson for Bernard Lafayette was obvious. It did not matter what the other person thought of you. It mattered only to do the right thing, to follow your conscience. In that split second of confrontation, Jim Lawson had not only conquered his ego, he had forced his enemy in some basic way to try and see him as a man. From then on, Bernard Lafayette understood some of the things he had been searching for. He did not need to explain to his enemy why he was doing this. Too much time, he decided, was wasted in this country by people who worried how they looked to others, and too little time spent on simply trying to figure out what was the right thing to do. Christ had not worried about how he looked to others. If you did the right thing, he learned that day, it was all right to be misunderstood. He did not have to shout out that he was doing this as an act of courage, not as an act of fear. The Children by David Halberstam. Strongly recommended. See you next time.